On this episode of China Unscripted, the Party Congress begins, a dangerous protest against Xi Jinping, and Elon Musk is an idiot. Welcome to China Unscripted. I'm Chris Chappell.
I'm Shelley Chung.
And I'm Matt Ganesta.
So are you guys excited for the 20th Party Congress?
Yeah, the one that starts yesterday.
Yes, we are recording this on Friday before it is happening. But hey, it's 2 weeks of nonstop inter-party action.
In a black box. Or should we say a red box?
Ooh.
But we don't know what's happening exactly.
I mean, we don't know because it's Friday.
I don't know.
I know, but this is coming out Monday, so you're watching this on Monday.
There's just something in the air.
We probably
like the
still
leaves
don't know
are
what's
changing
happening on
colors.
The smog fills the sky.
No. There's no smog for the Party Congress, Matt.
Probably not.
Yeah,
Because-
fortunately, zero COVID has gotten rid of China's economy. So
Well, I mean, also their traditional thing is to like shut down factories and make sure that nothing will. They do this twice a year, once for the Party Congress in the fall, right, and once for the two meetings in the spring.
Right. And what's good is that so far this past week in Beijing, absolutely nothing has gone wrong.
we'll get to that in a second. But first, I think we want to, ahead of the Party Congress, Xi Jinping is really kind of pushing the just very subtle propaganda. It's like you might not even notice it's propaganda unless you really are paying attention. But did you know that Xi Jinping, he understands the ethnics?
Is that the cue to roll the propaganda?
Roll the propaganda.
The elderly, the young, the underprivileged, ethnic groups. In order to care for them, we first need to understand them. There is a man who understands and cares for the people. No matter how much time it takes or how far distant, he will be there with those in need. From rural areas in central China to an earthquake-stricken region, from the cold days of winter to the sunny spring, nothing deters him from coming together with people and understanding their needs. He learned sign language so that he could communicate with handicapped teens. Sitting on a worn-out mattress, he chatted with an 80-year-old man about how to fight poverty. At the border, he stood together with soldiers on duty. In an ethnic home, he shared happiness and life stories with local folks. Along the way, he has made up his mind on what needs to be done. From helping tens of millions out of poverty, to addressing the challenges posed by nature, to making one landmark accomplishment after another. He cares for China's 1.4 billion people and their future. He understands and trusts the people. He is, in turn, understood and trusted. That's why Xi Jinping spends so much time among them.
江山就是人民，人民就是江山。
Yes, gosh, if only people could somehow understand ethnics. Fortunately, Xi Jinping has successfully studied them and spent time among them and understands them.
It's so weirdly tone deaf. It just gives me this weird feeling inside.
That's patriotism, Matt. Or gas.
Yeah. You gotta love at the end when the music starts to swell and it's like, yes, he understands and trusts the people.
One man.
I did think it was interesting, the part where it's like, he has lifted tens of millions of people out of poverty. And so that's kind of a weird propaganda line because, the party has claimed for a while now that it's lifted so many people out of poverty. Is like each successive leader going to like take credit for being the one to lift people out of poverty?
Well, no, this is brilliant. See, so the Communist Party lifted, Deng Xiaoping lifted a lot of people out of poverty, right? Because Mao put them in poverty, but ignore that part. And then, Jiang Zemin was able to lift his group out of poverty, and forget about Hu Jintao, Xi Jinping. And so what's going to happen, the idea is that you got to keep some people in poverty always, so that each successive leader can lift more and more of them out of poverty.
But Xi Jinping has already declared that they've won the war on poverty.
Yeah, but all they did was change the definition of poverty.
Oh, that's not the only thing. But yeah.
It's now, what's the term they use? It's like low income. So
Xi Jinping's goal to create a moderately prosperous society.
Yes.
So such ambition. Hey, considering zero COVID, it like moderately prosperous is really reaching now.
I mean, but there's the whole COVID economy.
That's true. That's how much did they say? Like 100 million people taking a test every couple of days would be 900
million people or something taking doses 3 times a week.
You mean tests?
Tests. I mean, yeah. So that would cost $100 billion.
Yeah, I think that's what it.
Right, and so
each year.
Yeah, and so that money is, of course, money spent by the Chinese government from that comes in lieu of other things they'd be spending it on, and that money is going to, the COVID testing companies and all the different like ways that whole process gets played out.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the people who are enforcing the zero COVID policy are actually migrant workers. We've talked about this before.
They're the ethnics.
You don't have to be an ethnic to be a migrant worker.
That's true, because you can be like a migrant in your own country, which we don't really have that concept so much in the US. Like me, I was born in California and now I live in New York, but I'm not really a migrant in any meaningful way because like I still have equal access to everything in New York as a resident that I did in California.
From Xi Jinping's perspective, you would be an ethnic.
That might be true with my blonde hair and blue eyes. Yeah, but my point is that like you can be, because of the hukou system in China, you can be from, say, Gansu province and you move to Shanghai to get a job.
Is anyone from the Gansu province?
I've never met anyone from Gansu.
Me neither.
But the point is then like you don't have access to all the public services. Your kids can't go to the public schools.
Yeah, that's an urban-rural thing too. Like if you have a rural hukou, you cannot move to a city and like get healthcare or public education or anything.
The rural hukou.
Yeah.
Tricky thing to say.
Yeah.
People talk about the rural-urban divide in the United States, but that's like only a sort of political thing. But in China, it's like actually you can't just become urban. You can't just do that without.
Even if you sag your pants a bit?
No, Chris.
Well, this is an interesting thing because there was a big, Mao sent people to the countryside, but then there was like a big push under Xi Jinping to like get people into the cities.
Right.
And now that's not working because, you can't state plan these kind of things. And so now they're again trying to get people back to the countryside. Back and forth.
They only want certain people in the cities.
Right. And I think part of the problem with people living in the countryside is that the economy is different. So like if you, for example, live on the land and you and your neighbors are getting some portion of your food or sustenance or, work through trade relationships, it's not really contributing to GDP. And that's really problematic. And it's even more so with, for example, some of the ethnics, as Xi Jinping would call them, like people who live in the Tibetan plateau who are traditionally herders. They've been brought into the cities to work in factories because that contributes to GDP and that lifts people out of poverty.
Yeah, they basically are like, all right, you cannot do you cannot have your nomadic herding lifestyle. We'll put you in these apartment blocks.
Right. And it's like this idea that everything has to be for the betterment of the country, although it's actually the party. But there's so little respect for individual rights. There's basically it's just not even a factor that you could have any individuality.
Did we watch the same video about Xi Jinping? Because I got an entirely different take from it.
What was your take, Chris?
I mean, he understands the people and he's helping them. He's among them.
I mean, this is mild compared to the Chinese language propaganda that's going on, I have to say.
That's a good point, that this is obviously, it's weird, this is geared towards a Western audience that's in English, but...
I mean, I don't know if it's geared toward a Western audience or if they just have to produce some propaganda in English. But it is, this is just so we watched a 2-minute video that's this kind of stuff. There is currently, or in the 2 weeks leading up to the Party Congress, there is a 16-episode series being broadcast on CCTV called The Navigator. It was like a primetime television documentary about Xi Jinping and the Communist Party and how great everything has been over the last 10 years of CCP rule. And if you thought this 2-minute thing was unwatchable and heavy-handed, you have it is just I cannot describe to you the emotionality of the narrator. You've heard that type of Chinese narration before, right? Where it's just so overly emotional.
Like a soap opera?
Kind of, yeah. It is very, but in a very laudatory way. Oh, he's the leader of the country and only one man could
This is sounding like erotic propaganda.
Okay, well, I'm probably not doing it that well, but it is just that type of overly effusive stuff, and 16 episodes of this. And also I noticed some nice subtle propaganda. I only watched part of one of the episodes because
there's so much you can take.
Yeah, there's a part of it where it talks about in this chaotic world, and then it shows the EU protests and then it shows protests in the US, and it's and then it was only the leadership of the party is bringing stability to China. It was that kind of idea, right? And then
cute footage of Uyghurs being blindfolded and loaded onto trains.
No, it's the happy dancing Uyghurs, Matt.
Oh, sorry.
The ones working in factories that are producing stuff for GDP. And also the whole thing starts with a little girl's voice singing "I love you, China." And then it's just these sweeping images of China, and then a spacewalk, and then a giant hammer and sickle on a waving red background. It's a lot.
Yeah, well, the sad thing is, to get ready for the Party Congress, you shouldn't be watching just 16 episodes of this show. You should watch a real soap opera, our General Hostility playlist, which you can see on China Uncensored. Get a full rundown of all the party internal conflicts, and you can celebrate by wearing your very own General Hostility t-shirt, which you can buy now for a limited time only at ChinaUncensored.tv/merchandise.
That's
where you're
beautifully
going with it.
capitalist
Yes.
of you, Chris.
Yeah,
There we go.
absolutely. Now that's the show to watch to get ready for the Party Congress.
Not the Navigator.
Not The Navigator. You can watch that if you like. It sounds moving.
Like moving to another room.
Ooh.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting though, because in that episode, we published an episode about is Xi Jinping the next Mao Zedong, and you made the point, Chris, that some of this propaganda is not necessarily a sign of strength, right?
Yeah, I think a lot of people mistakenly think that Xi Jinping is close to Mao levels of power, that means he has unchallenged total power, which even Mao Zedong didn't have that kind of power. Mao got into his position because he purged a lot of people, had to struggle to get it. After the Great Leap Forward, which was a disaster, he kind of fell out of power, and the Cultural Revolution was him sort of using it as a way to get back into power. So the idea that any party leader, any communist leader can sit comfortably in power is just inaccurate because there's always someone coming for you.
And it's interesting how there was some analysis from Sino Insider, which is like a China risk consultancy, that was talking about how the propaganda is actually Xi Jinping's way of like boosting himself.
Because there are very real issues facing China that even other party members are aware of. He hasn't achieved a lot of the things he set out to achieve. But I mean, yeah, people see that zero COVID is actively hurting the Chinese economy, and lots of people aren't happy about that.
And I think that's the main
members.
thing. I think that's the main thing right now is zero COVID. But even a lot of the things that they're like, oh, he was successful with this and that, is not necessarily like he hasn't done everything he set out to do. So all the propaganda is kind of papering over a lot of that.
Right.
But even I noticed in this like 2-minute English language propaganda video that we watched, it's very much equating Xi Jinping with the people, right? It's like, oh, Xi understands the people understand Xi.
Xi the people.
So, not bad.
Well, thank you.
I guess we should also mention that me telling you one of your puns is not bad is actually
It's very high praise. Thank you, Shelley.
Leave a comment below. Was that a good pun? Let us know.
Are we gonna have the audience start to rate Matt's puns?
Yeah, why not?
The people shall decide.
Yeah.
People's puns.
But like Mao, if I don't like the rating that you give me, watch out.
You're gonna get burned.
Oh, I thought that was going to lead into another pun.
No.
Mm.
No, it was just a threat.
No.
Well,
this is how to make our podcast really lovable. Like you threaten your viewers.
It might work. You had a point, Shelley. I'm pretty sure you had a point.
Yeah, what happened? I got derailed by Xi the people. Okay, so, but it was Xi Jinping and the people. So it's by equating them this way in the propaganda, I think it is actually a way of saying to his rivals that they better watch out because, if they go against Xi Jinping, they're going against the people.
The people love Xi, so they would rise up.
Yeah,
Well, I mean, that's essentially the Cultural Revolution, right? It's that Mao got, because Mao was power struggling with other political people, that by getting the people, that is like the common man on the street, to wave a little red book and hold a portrait of Mao and have that happen on a mass scale. Right.
Mass violence.
Right. So it's people on the ground supporting Mao. And you get a big enough movement for that. And then it allowed Mao to maintain power.
Yeah.
Right. So if Xi Jinping was looking at that model of the Cultural Revolution, he'd see, oh, well, this works. And there's absolutely no long-term downside to that.
Well, I don't think it is the Cultural Revolution anymore is the thing. Like, I don't think
No.
that could happen again.
Oh, I totally agree. It would play out in a very different way. But just the idea of seeing that you can use the people and their love of Xi Jinping to
and
like,
their alleged
gain power.
love of Xi Jinping.
Yeah, that's the big thing. Like, is there really that kind of love for Xi Jinping? Well, that's a big question. And, you hinted at this earlier, Matt.
But before we go to that, I think one of the things is about this propaganda is that Xi Jinping and the people, like, and then there's also the relationship between the party and the people, right? Like a lot of the type of propaganda talks about, the people's red heritage or the red genes or GENES, genes, not item of clothing genes, but like the idea that, almost that the Communist Party is a fundamental part of China's DNA.
Which really is just a red herring.
Okay.
I was going to say, come on, party people.
Leave your comments below.
Maybe not on that one.
I had a point. My point was that they're it's the overinflated thing again, where they're trying so hard to say Xi is, with the people
They're
because
compensating.
they're afraid that people don't like Xi. Like they're saying the party is, the red genes, the party is part of China's DNA. Because the thing that the Chinese Communist Party is most afraid of, I would say, is that Chinese people would be like, wait, actually, we don't need the Chinese Communist Party. Like
Mhm.
we could do this without them.
Well,
Like we could have a country without the CCP.
Name one country that operates successfully without the CCP running it.
Well, that's the thing, right? That they're afraid of that, so they need to really kind of brainwash people into thinking that like this is the way it is.
Well,
Like,
and
it's-
also, like we saw, there's the protests in the EU and the US, like you said, like
Chaos.
it's only the Communist Party that's keeping China stable and protecting them from COVID.
yeah, so that's exactly it. I think that they need to instill that idea into people because they're really afraid that people aren't feeling that way.
Yeah. Do you think maybe at the end of the day, Xi Jinping is just, very lonely and afraid? I'm not really going anywhere with this, but I mean,
Okay.
I think so too. I mean, it is probably lonely at the top because he could never really trust anyone.
didn't Stalin like never sleep in the same place?
I don't know this.
Yeah, like he was very paranoid of being assassinated.
I wonder why.
Yeah, maybe with all the people he got.
Yeah. That's the problem with power struggles.
That's true. Why can't we have a country built on love?
Is that a rhetorical question or?
I guess basically. I think. Well, no, because it's very obvious why we can't have that. But so yes, there is some signs that the people really might not actually love Xi Jinping as much as they say, or as much as Xi might say. And for context for this next story, like ahead of the party congress, especially in Beijing, security is super tight. Like the last party congress, they banned knives. You couldn't buy
Like a
knives.
kitchen knife.
Yeah, because you might attack someone. Or, I remember one year, I think it was in the 2012 one, they banned ping pong balls because people might like write a message on them and throw it out of the taxi windows. And then, you're just walking around feeling love for the party. And then you see a little ping pong ball and it completely subverts you.
There was also, I think, in the 2017 Party Congress, they didn't let people open their windows.
Yeah, I think there was something with birds too. Like they didn't want, like they were afraid people would write messages and like attach them to birds. I might be making that up actually.
When you say it, it kind of sounds familiar, but I also don't remember the story. That was 5 years ago. That's a long time ago.
That's right.
Yeah, I kind of feel like I remember something about pigeons, but
There was something
also
about pigeons.
very
Although, I
big.
think they were like giving them like anal tests in case to see if somebody put like a bomb in the pigeon.
Okay, this is starting to sound more familiar now.
Yeah. The problem is like the things they do are so crazy. Like I'm second guessing myself. Like this
You're like,
this
"Did I
sounds
make
stupid.
this up?"
Anal bombs and pigeons. Surely that can't be right.
Should I look this up?
Yeah,
Keep talking.
sure.
Yeah,
Chris.
go ahead and put that in your browser history.
Man, this if I'm
Won't
wrong
be
on
the
this
weirdest
one,
thing in my
what a-
browser
what a-
history.
What a wrong thing. Well, I won't share that story.
You
But-
know, I was thinking that if Xi Jinping really wants to be more lovable, I know what he could do.
Hmm?
He could have people compare him to one of the most lovable cartoon characters of all time, Winnie the Pooh.
That's a great idea. I mean, who doesn't love Winnie the Pooh?
I mean, really, like Winnie the Pooh doesn't have enemies. So if only Xi Jinping could
Didn't
just
Eeyore hate him?
No, Eeyore was just depressed.
Oh,
You needed some Prozac.
Yeah.
that's true.
But like yeah, I think that if Xi Jinping were to just embrace Winnie the Pooh, he'd be a lot more relatable. People would actually feel closer to him. And he's really missed this golden opportunity, literally golden.
Okay, I found it. A tweet from People's Daily China from 2014, from September 2014. So this is actually not for the Party Congress. It was for ahead of National Day, which is October 1st. So 10,000 pigeons go through anal security check for suspicious objects Tuesday, ready to be released on National Day on Wednesday.
I didn't make it up. It's that stupid.
It's like a white pigeon, so we'll put the tweet up. So they were like, I guess, doing like a release of like white pigeons, you know.
you can't make it up. Like in my mind, I was like, no, wait, this, as I'm saying it,
Well-
they were doing anal tests to see if they had like a bomb or something. Like,
Well, so
No,
it
that's
wasn't
stupid.
quite what you thought it was at first, which was you thought people were tying messages to pigeons.
which would, I mean, that would make even more
No, but
sense.
just, I
But
just
that was the less
imagine some
stupid version.
conspiracy theorists be like,
Yeah.
you know, they're doing anal checks on the pigeons. It's like, but actually, it's true though.
Or even worse, like the idea of like, hey, I know how we can finally overthrow the Chinese Communist Party. We'll get these pigeons and we'll put little bombs in their butts. Let's do that. Versus what actually happened in China, in Beijing this week. So the point is, like, we were all leading up to this point that the security is very, very tight ahead of a party congress or something like National Day.
Uh-huh.
They anal tested. Who got that job, I wonder? Somebody who like lost
Probably
a power struggle.
Migrant workers.
One of the ethnics.
I mean, it was just preparing them for what would happen 6 years later or 7 years later when they had to do COVID testing on people.
Oh, when they started doing the anal
Anal swabs. Yeah.
Does the party have an anal fixation?
I really don't want to know, honestly.
I'm getting just so disturbed by this. So let's move on to something
Security
glorious.
is tight.
Something glorious
Security
that
is-
happened this past week.
Okay.
Go ahead, Shelley.
Go ahead, Matt.
People protested.
Oh, well.
A person allegedly protested. I think he was probably, CIA plant. But somebody unfurled 2 banners in Beijing, which again, we've established security is tight. And we'll put it up on screen with the translations because there's no way I remember what it said
Shelley-
exactly off the top of my
Shelley,
head.
you want to read out the translation of what the banner says?
Yeah, so one banner said, I mean, you could translate this in a bunch of different ways, but essentially, no to COVID test, yes to food, no to lockdowns, yes to freedom, no to lies, yes to dignity, no to cultural revolution, yes to reform, no to leaders, yes to votes, don't be a slave, be a citizen. And then there was a second banner that said, students strike, workers strike, remove the traitor and dictator Xi Jinping.
I appreciate that. I was going to rely on just like an image, but then this is a podcast, so it makes sense to actually say things instead of relying on visuals.
Yeah. Well, we'll put
Um,
the visual up for the people who are watching this one on YouTube.
Yeah.
So.
I think one of the interesting things in terms of how the party reacted with censorship is it's just so over the top.
The people who do anal checks of pigeons, they went over the top.
There's a lot of things being done to excess under Communist Party rule, but the censorship, like after these banners were unfurled, and they were, the police took them down almost immediately, but there's photos of them,
So yeah, it spread on social media quick.
right? And so, Shelley, what are some of the things that got censored?
Oh, I mean, any discussion of like people who are getting their WeChat accounts suspended for sharing any photos or videos of the event. Then words like warrior, words like courageous person, words like I think the most ridiculous one is the words "I saw it" being censored. So literally, I saw it, like it.
So, if
Being-
you're having like a WeChat conversation with, hey, did you see the latest Spider-Man movie? I saw it.
Right. And then like there's a song, what's it called? The Sutong Bridge or something?
Yeah, the overpass where the guy hung up these banners is called the Sutong Bridge. And so there was a song called the Sutong Bridge, and that song got taken off of all of these music platforms.
That was just an existing song that had come
Yeah.
out years ago.
And then even dumber than that, another song that was just called Beijing's Bridge, which is not a reference to this particular bridge, just Beijing's Bridge also got taken off of music platforms.
Well, I think what the party really needs to do is like, what if somebody took photos of this event or even recordings of those songs and put them up pigeons' butts
Okay.
and then release them into the city, well, somebody might hear that or see that. They might grab a pigeon and open it up and take a look at the photo there.
Well, the thing that okay. If you've ever been around pigeons, you know that whatever's up their butts comes out pretty fast. So I don't think people would have to go looking.
Fair point. And yet the party
Went looking.
went looking.
There we go. Yeah, but the interesting thing about this protest too is, again, it was one person. In some of the videos and photos, you can see what looks like a guy in a construction worker outfit, like an orange jumpsuit or something, putting up the banners. And then there's
So
a
they
video.
should also ban any reference to the Village People.
There you go. And then there's also video of him that looks like it's the police taking him into custody, like putting him in a police car. So this was, as far as we know, just one guy. And in any other country where you can protest, like this would have been just like some maybe kind of crazy guy putting up banners in, protest banners in the middle of this bridge overpass. But because it's China and it's Beijing and there's no protest allowed, this became like international news.
Yeah, I mean, just the other day I saw somebody driving a truck with a giant deer he made out of wood with the words "buck fightin'."
Mm-hmm.
And like this is what happens in America.
Wait, well, this was on the deer?
There was the cutout of the deer, a giant sticking out of his truck, and then the sign below that.
Okay.
But I mean, like our civilization has not collapsed in America because of this one warrior.
But yeah, if that truck said something like, "Buck Xi Jinping,"
or I saw it.
yeah, like that, it would be complete. Like, yeah, that. Yeah.
It's just like in Hong Kong, they basically stopped people from walking around holding up blank pieces of paper.
Yes.
Right. And just like the level of paranoia that's expressed by the Chinese leadership is just it's just hard for me to understand. But obviously it means they're very, very strong and confident in their rule.
Well, I mean, again, in that propaganda video about Xi Jinping, or was it The Navigator, where you see the protests in the EU?
Oh, that was The Navigator, yeah.
That was The Navigator. Yeah, I mean, that's the protests are a sign of chaos. You don't.
Buck fighting is a sign of chaos.
My gosh, when people saw that, the cars were swerving everywhere. People ignored traffic signals. It was madness.
I suppose the doing the deer thing was, I guess, a little clever. Like,
I don't know.
because
Just for the record, I do not necessarily endorse any deer-related protest messages that I see. Yes.
Yeah, I'm just still distracted by that idea. I hope you took a photo.
I'm driving a car. I'm not
Okay,
taking a photo.
Too bad.
Yeah. Well, or like, those little, like you'll see at gas stations a lot now, like a sticker of Joe Biden saying, "I did that," pointing to the gas. Like that kind of a thing. Imagine if that happened in China. That would actually seem to be a little more effective of a protest than like unfurling two very conspicuous banners. But that's a good question. Like what kind of protest movements can really get going in China, considering the party will check the buttholes of pigeons? Like, could people do a sticker campaign? Just you could slap a little sticker.
I mean, now there's so much surveillance that I feel like you would definitely get caught very quickly.
That's a good point.
But I was thinking of it really depends on how, in terms of protests in China, it depends what you're protesting and how disruptive that is in relation to the CCP. Like when
because mass movements happen all the time in China.
Mass protests.
Like what if we want to spontaneously protest the Japanese?
That will be tolerated up until a point when it actually becomes disruptive, like Shelley was saying.
Yeah, or I was thinking about like Evergrande, right? In was it Evergrande that the protests were against, where they were
And
having
there's the parking lots. Yeah.
yeah, and then they were like the actual employees were protesting because they had to buy Evergrande products and then they couldn't get their money back.
Hmm.
Or the Henan Bank protests. They tolerated those for a few days, and then it was getting too big, and they were starting to go to the government offices instead of just to the banks. And then that's when they started being like, "Oh, your health code is mysteriously red. You can't go anywhere."
Hmm.
Yeah. So I think it depends on the level of protest. But something like this in Beijing that actually names Xi Jinping and says to like remove the traitor Xi Jinping, that is not okay.
That's an escalation. But yeah, I get this question a lot. Like, why don't the Chinese people rise up? Why don't they do something? Why don't they protest? And I mean, it is difficult in that system to do it. Like when as you mentioned, like when the surveillance is so intense that like even sticking a little sticker on a gas pump would probably get you caught.
Yeah, I saw a news video. I think it was from BBC. This is like a year or so before the pandemic, where the reporter was basically like somehow got access to inside one of the Chinese police surveillance bureaus, and it basically showed how his movements like all across the city were tracked by like a whole suite of surveillance cameras. So basically, like, in other words, that the police, and this is several years ago, could track an individual's movements anywhere across an entire city. And as they leave the zone of one camera, they enter the zone of another camera, and the system is able to just follow that individual through facial recognition. And so the level of surveillance that's been developed in the last 2 decades is just insane. Because just 20 years ago, surveillance was like, a building might have surveillance, a camera that would link to, VHS or Betamax tapes in their office, right? And they'd record their surveillance, but there wasn't any way to nationalize that or to hack to access that from a central location because it was all analog. And this digital revolution, in part helped by, technology from companies like Oracle and so on, are able to like transform this into China into this AI powered individual person tracking system. So there's just no leeway anymore to do it, and it's so easy for the police to nip anything in the bud.
Well, I mean, they didn't nip this guy.
Well, they nipped him pretty quick.
Afterwards, I mean, there were a lot of videos and photos of this. So,
right. And we also don't know how many other things like this have been stopped before they were begun.
Well, see, I don't think that, I think that I kind of vaguely remember that one you're talking about where they track the guy's movements around. And I think that there is a weird duality, though, when it comes to China's security system, where it's both very, very good
sometimes the Huawei cameras just
also
don't work
not
properly. Because sometimes the Huawei cameras just don't work properly.
well, or they've overinflated their abilities.
Yeah, or also just to be like a panopticon where everyone knows that they could be under surveillance at any given time. They just don't know if they are at that particular moment.
Yeah, so I think that is the point that the Communist Party cares about. It doesn't necessarily need to be able to stop every guy from being able to unfurl a banner, immediately or before they do it. They just want people to watch themselves and not, not be scared of crossing the line. Like when this guy unfurled these banners and then they took them down pretty quickly. By the time Western news organizations got to that place, it was maybe an hour or two later, and there's no sign of this protest. And then they start trying to ask people if they saw it, and people aren't willing to admit it. Most people were just wouldn't talk to them, pretended they didn't know what they were talking about, So that is the part of what you were calling the panopticon, Matt. I think that's especially useful to the CCP, even if one, courageous lone warrior or whatever, and that lone warrior also got censored.
Oh.
What about Wolf Warrior?
No. Not that I know.
Because what if people started using Wolf Warrior to refer to that guy? That's my suggestion for all you people in mainland China illegally watching this by using Surfshark VPN. Start using Wolf Warrior, right? And then
they have to censor their own propaganda.
that's
Is that what
right.
you mean?
Exactly.
But yeah, so they like that one guy can be dealt with, right? But they don't want other people getting ideas from that and joining him or being like, hey, I can protest now too, or something like that.
Right.
So they want everybody else to be scared.
Yeah, I mean, like for every one person who's got so little to lose that he's willing to do that, there's 99 more people who, under other circumstances, would protest or join someone else's protest.
Well,
that are just like, it's not worth it.
Well, yeah, like we just saw that movie Eternal Spring, and one of the things that movie talks about is how, you know, in Changchun, this one Falun Gong practitioner got the idea to like put messages about Falun Gong on balloons and release them in the city. And like that was very effective. Like people saw those, the police had a hard time taking them down because, you know, they're balloons.
Well, I mean, that was 20 years ago though.
Mm-hmm.
So like the surveillance was different then.
Yeah, that's true too.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, but most people wouldn't do that. And it does take a lot of courage to do something like that, even with less surveillance. But yeah, most people weren't willing to do it. And most people, you know, who practice Falun Gong or supported Falun Gong weren't interested in doing anything publicly because the risk was too great.
I think you get into this place where, I mean, if you've lived in a communist society, or I think this could probably apply to a lot of other authoritarian societies, like people understand kind of where the lines are, right, and that they shouldn't cross. And then there's a lot of low-level civil disobedience, I would say. I don't think you would even call it civil disobedience. Disobedience is exactly, but let's say with zero COVID, you know, everybody is supposed to scan their health code app every time they go into a shop or something like that. People don't want to do it, and they think it's stupid, and they don't want to get caught if there's some kind of, you know, quarantine that happens. And they get contact traced or something, and they happen to be in IKEA at the same time as somebody else whose health code turned red, and now they all have to go to a quarantine camp. Like people are afraid of that, and they hate having to scan it, so they'll try to get around it. But like this is not like a big. People aren't going to be like, I refused to do the health code app. They'll do sneaky things like take a photo of their health code app and like pretend to scan the barcode, like they'll pretend to scan it, and then maybe there's a security card there, and the guy knows you're not actually scanning it, but he also doesn't care and doesn't want to do it, so he just lets you go.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of this low level kind of like disobeying the rules, breaking the rules, trying to get around the rules that comes with that level of heavy-handed bureaucracy. So I think there's always that tension between people trying to not conform with the things they don't really want to do, and then the, you know, authoritarian government trying to make it harder for them to get around the things.
Well, I mean, the whole reason we have this concept of like Winnie the Pooh is banned in China is because people were using that as kind of a subversive way to criticize the government by just having a photo of Obama and Xi and a picture of Tigger and Winnie the Pooh.
I mean, at first, I think that was just kind of a joke because Obama
They
looks
did look
tall
like
and
it,
thin, and like Xi Jinping was like rotund, and so together they looked at the photo. But then, yeah, it became kind of a subversive way to refer to Xi Jinping.
Yeah, or the whole lexicon of like online terms, like river crab, which I mean that's an old one, but like it sounded like what, harmony?
Yeah, because they would talk about harmonizing the internet.
Yeah.
Or like there's a lot of this kind of doublespeak. So that's where some of the stuff with, as soon as something like the protest that happened in Beijing happens, everybody starts sharing these videos and photos. Everybody starts getting censored. Then people start trying to come up with different things, like saying something about a lone warrior, or just saying like, I saw this, and then then that gets censored, and then people try to find another way around it. Yeah.
Well, yeah. So it's like when people do ask me, like, "Oh, how come people in China don't protest. And it's like, it's not that they don't, they do. They just have these ways to deal with the realities of a regime that will, anal probe pigeons.
Uh, yeah. I mean, somebody on Twitter was saying that a friend of theirs cried when seeing the video of the guy putting up the banners because she just like knew what was going to happen to the guy.
Oh yeah. Yeah. That person is not in a happy place right now.
Yeah. I mean, who knows how that happened, but he's going to be in some kind of prison for...
What if it was just Jiang Zemin wearing a hard hat?
I would be impressed that he's still so mobile at 96, because every time I've seen him come out on like a national day or something,
it's like being propped up.
Yeah, like 3 people are holding him up, essentially.
Yeah. He's been blessed with a long life. Great.
He's been cursed with a long life.
Yeah, that's probably a better way to put it. But so I think this is actually a good transition to our next story. Like, we were talking about some of the really heavy-handed surveillance and monitoring that happens in China. And a big reason the Communist Party has that is because the technology was essentially given to them, been built up by Western companies. And, this is a horrible thing that, a lot of what the Communist Party can do is because of the West. But, recently there was the CHIPS Act that was passed and signed into law by Biden. This is basically, actually has been a pretty effective way of damaging Chinese semiconductor companies and whatnot that rely heavily on getting U.S. semiconductor makers, et cetera, all this kind of sensitive technology that is a big part of, what China needs to develop technology like surveillance, like missiles. This has actually been a pretty effective...
I mean, it is a big
legislation,
deal. Yeah. I mean, I think there's a two-pronged thing that happened. One was the CHIPS Act that happened a couple months ago. But like last week, the Biden administration released new rules for U.S. companies and related to Chinese chip making companies. So
this is kind of an extension of what the Trump administration did with Huawei, correct?
In a way, like the Trump administration did something like this to Huawei, and now the Biden administration is doing this to like almost all Chinese like chip manufacturing firms. It is a very broad rule, and it goes a little bit further than the Trump one did in that it also restricts U.S. citizens from working on or helping these Chinese semiconductor companies. So what the Trump administration did to Huawei essentially is they restricted any company who used U.S. technology to manufacture chips from selling those chips to Huawei.
And so that even roped in non-American companies, like any company in the world that is, using U.S. technology, they were then essentially cut off.
Right.
Yeah, and U.S. technology is used for, I mean, almost like an incredibly high percentage.
Yeah. So one thing because we had Chris Miller on, author of Chip War, that was a couple of weeks ago on the podcast. And one of the things that I didn't know before reading his book was that, like, even though, semiconductors, these computer chips are made all over the world, and a relatively small number in the U.S., but a lot of them are made in South Korea, Japan, especially high-end ones in Taiwan, and also China. But no matter where they're made, the software that allows the machines to actually, I guess, print the chips, or the software that's necessary, that software is American software, and so all these companies, whether it's TSMC in Taiwan or a company in China or South Korea, they're still using some American technology in the supply chain for those chips. And so essentially, because the US is in the supply chain at some point in the manufacture of basically all microchips, then that gives the US government incredible control if they're willing to use that power, which it seems like Congress has decided they are.
I mean, this is actually the Biden administration. This is an executive branch action.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the Biden administration.
Yeah.
So the Biden administration clearly realizes the the power that they have by being even just one point in that supply chain.
So it is essentially, and also because, you're basically now no longer allowed to sell like US equipment or software to these companies, but also even if they already have the equipment or the software, like if Americans can't work with these Chinese companies, then like let's say you need somebody to troubleshoot your software, like the company that sold you the software can't do it anymore.
Right. And you won't get updates. So you'll be stuck making only the chips that you could have made with outdated software. So within a few years, it's just going to be not that useful anymore compared to what other countries are able to produce.
Yeah. So it's going to set China's semiconductor industry back a long way.
Now, isn't there a little bit of a loophole, though, where these companies, they just need to get a license to continue to sell to China?
Companies on the entity list do need to get a license.
And then the problem is that the Commerce Department is known to essentially approve all.
That happened under the Trump administration. So
yeah, this isn't Biden it's alone.
So we'll have to see.
No matter what the Buck Fighting guy might say. I'll try to shout that to him when I see him next time.
What that
politics.
Excuse me,
is
sir. What do
nuanced.
you think of the Biden administration's recent semiconductor moves against the Chinese Communist Party?
I'm sure the Buck Fighting guy will have a very well reasoned out answer to that.
As we're both shouting back as we're driving, yeah.
But but there's almost no point in the Biden administration doing something that's heavy-handed if they don't mean to actually enforce the rule.
And the Commerce Department is part of the executive branch, right? So theoretically, there would be the ability to hopefully rein that kind of behavior in.
Yeah. So we'll have to see how it's actually implemented. But if it is actually implemented the way that it is written, it will seriously hurt China's semiconductor industry.
I mean, it's already had an impact. Like the stocks are tumbling. It's got them panicking.
Yeah, and we haven't really seen a reaction from the CCP yet, probably because this happened like right before the party Congress was just going to start, so they didn't have the capacity to deal with any of this. But I'm sure there's going to be some kind of retaliatory action because this is like this is big and damaging to them.
Yeah, and so that is really great to see. Again, the U.S. government is finally taking some concrete steps to counter the Chinese Communist Party.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen some arguments that this might be a risk in a certain way because now that you've struck such a blow to China's semiconductor industry, they might be less inclined to do something like wait longer to take over Taiwan because some people the analysis of some people was that they would wait until they were able to manufacture their own semiconductors.
But isn't it better if the PLA tries to take Taiwan before the PLA is ready to do that?
That's a good argument. Yeah.
Well, maybe. In terms of, would it be better than not taking Taiwan? No. Is it better than them taking it later when they're definitely going to succeed? Then yeah.
Right. Like China is actively building up their Navy and their rocket force and everything to prepare for this invasion. And, the US and Taiwan are really not necessarily prepared. And it's also unclear how much more prepared the US and Taiwan are going to get. But we know the trajectory, it's very clear, of the PLA. So, you've got the PLA absolutely on the getting ready to take over trajectory. And the US and Taiwan are kind of on the maybe preparation side, right? So it is better, I think, to be able to deal with it early.
Well, I mean, it would be better to kind of put them in the position where they won't do it.
Oh, that's far better.
Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe, if striking this blow and then doing some of the other things with Taiwan, which we should have been doing years ago, with, joint military exercises and, getting a naval base in Taiwan and that sort of thing. And that would be, to do that now while the PLA is really still not ready to take action against it is a better way to prevent the attempt in the first place.
I think that with the chip thing also, it's the calculation that the US might have like maximum leverage right now.
Yeah.
Because if the US has like so much influence over the technology being used at this moment, for them to restrict that now makes a lot more sense than waiting until maybe China's already started to grow some of their own homegrown tech, or other countries have taken over more of the market.
That's going to be the fallout from this, which is that the CCP will realize that they have to home grow their entire microchip supply chain. And that's going to take a long time, and they'll have to steal more technology, and it's going to be hard to do. But they will make a big push for that, as they've been making a big push to have homegrown, ABCD, like all different things.
Well,
right. And like when the US put sanctions on Russia, you saw like, China and Russia banks trying to use like an alternate system to move money around. And so that just means that these authoritarian regimes, especially China, are going to eventually develop their own system.
I mean, the CCP already started trying to grow their own semiconductor industry a couple of years ago. Like in the latest 5-year economic plan, Xi Jinping directly addresses the need to grow the Chinese semiconductor industry and lessen the reliance on foreign companies, while also still keeping other countries reliant on China economically. Like it is explicitly in there. So they already saw like that this was going to be a problem, and they needed to be able to do their own kind of like high-tech manufacturing, like semiconductors. So that ship already sailed. So the U.S. is kind of blocking them now from really being able to get further ahead with U.S. technology.
Yeah, because I think Chris Miller made a good point that semiconductors is not something you can just throw money at and get functioning semiconductors. Like there's a lot of know-how at all stages of the plan, not just like the factories themselves, but all the individual components that make semiconductors. So by doing this now, that really throws a huge roadblock in the Communist Party's goals. It's not like just like in a couple of years, like with they focus, they'll put a lot of money into it, they'll be equal to the United States or other countries.
Somebody actually said that this is basically forcing China to reinvent the wheel at every stage of their semiconductor development. So yeah, I guess we'll see. There was an article a few years ago about after China had announced that they were going to make this semiconductor push, and these local and provincial governments had thrown a lot of money at different companies that said they could do this. There was an analysis that showed that a lot of that money was completely wasted because it went toward companies who like just didn't have the technological capabilities. Like they overpromised a lot of stuff and weren't able to deliver. So like a lot of them went bankrupt or failed in other ways. So they threw a lot of money at it and got very little back.
And this is the thing, like, the Chinese Communist Party has used cheap Chinese knockoffs as a way to compete in a lot of areas, but there are some things that you just can't really knock off easily. And like these really high tech things are a place where the U.S. does have a lot of power, which the Trump administration, now the Biden administration, is effectively using. But I mean, this does ultimately tie back to Taiwan, which makes most of the world's really advanced semiconductors. And like if the Chinese Communist Party tries to invade Taiwan, I mean that's just going to completely blow up the supply chain of these critical resources. So I mean, there's got to be some way to resolve that conflict.
You know who we should ask? Because you know how billionaires are better than us and they're really smart?
Of course. I mean, they have so much money, it must mean they have bigger brains.
So is there any billionaire that maybe we could ask for his ideas on how to solve the China-Taiwan issue?
Hey, what about that Elon Musk guy? He's sort of a freewheeling, free speech kind of guy. Surely he has no hidden dark side.
Shelley, why are you laughing?
I bet Elon Musk has a great idea of how to resolve the China-Taiwan issue.
Let's not put billionaires in charge of foreign policy, please.
Well, so Elon Musk did actually have a great recommendation, which he told the Financial Times about a week ago. He said, "My recommendation would be to figure out a special administrative zone for Taiwan that is reasonably palatable. Probably won't make everybody happy. And it's possible, and I think probably, in fact, that they could have an arrangement that's more lenient than Hong Kong."
Like, come on, like you're saying, hey, free independent country, I got a great idea. How about you become a special administrative region of an authoritarian regime?
I'm sure they will definitely respect your autonomy. They have a great track record.
Yeah, one country, two systems. I mean, when has that ever failed?
I like also that he specifically says that he thinks they could get a better arrangement than Hong Kong.
Well, I think that in a way he's right that the Communist Party would certainly promise a better arrangement than Hong Kong.
Than Hong Kong's original arrangement or Hong Kong's current arrangement?
Well, than Hong Kong's current arrangement.
Well, yes, of course they would promise something better than that, because Hong Kong's current arrangement would basically be like, well, we're going to come in, take over everything and silence everybody and terrorize
that's how it is, because
the people.
Hong Kong was never even a British colony. It was only controlled.
Remember the Chinese official who said like they would need to do a lot of re-education in Taiwan when they take over?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think this is. I think Elon Musk might actually be an idiot.
Well, it just comes back to how sometimes really smart people can also be really stupid. Because, Elon Musk has been very successful in a lot of things. And, when you are that successful, it blinds you to your own shortcomings. And like he has been brilliant when it comes to electric vehicles and marketing electric vehicles.
And marketing flamethrowers.
And perfume.
And
what?
He's selling perfume now. You don't know about this?
I don't.
Yeah.
Smell like Elon Musk?
Oh my!
Is it called Musks?
Well, he made a joke about with a name like his, he should have gotten into the perfume industry, years ago. What was he fighting? And I don't remember what the perfume's called, but it's something weird.
Musk.
No, it's not called Musk.
But the point is that okay, so in
burnt hair.
Burnt hair. That's
the worst smell. But okay, so
he sold millions of dollars worth.
Elon Musk is a brilliant marketer. He has many other skills too, but he's a brilliant marketer, right? Because think about how he's been able to be involved in U.S. politics to get essentially convince the U.S. government to massively subsidize cars for the wealthy, right?
Yes, that's true.
That's the whole business model of Tesla. And even though there's an obvious disconnect as soon as you think about it, he's really good at that stuff. And he thinks that he understands how politics works. And to a degree he does in the US. But what he doesn't understand is that the Chinese Communist Party is not a normal government. It can't be reasoned with. They will break promises that they make to you, even if they pinky swear. Even a pinky swear.
I mean, he also had a stupid idea for Ukraine and Russia. So,
right. So he's not good at that. And I think my point is, because he's so brilliant in many ways, and because he's been so successful in so many ways, he really can't see his massive blind spots when it comes to dealing with these authoritarian regimes.
Well, especially he is, deeply in bed with the Chinese Communist Party, with Tesla in China, those cars, which are being subsidized by the U.S. government, rely on Chinese companies making the electric batteries that those cars need.
Right.
With getting the cobalt from all those nice little African children in the Congo and the mines.
Well, I think someday the CCP is going to nationalize Tesla.
Yeah.
And then we'll see how Elon Musk feels.
But I really am not comfortable with this guy potentially owning one of the biggest social media companies. I'm not really comfortable with him making the space vehicles for the US military. like
mean,
a guy who's very, very
who else is going to
compromised.
be it? Jeff Bezos? Is that better?
That's not better.
It's not better. Michael Bloomberg? Not better.
You know, the problem is these rich elites. If only the workers would rise up.
Oh gosh. I
if
mean,
only we had a supreme leader of these United States who had a real grasp on how to do things right.
I can do, I would know what to do. Just give me absolute power. Trust me, you're gonna love it.
yes. You have the trust of the people.
The people.
And so the people, you also trust the people. That's why you have the trust of the people, right?
And I understand them. And
Yes.
they understand me.
Yeah. But I think the problem with Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and Michael Bloomberg is the same that, happens. You don't have to be a billionaire to be an idiot about the Chinese Communist Party. Like a lot of, sadly, the U.S. foreign policy establishment, like for years, right, decades, was like, okay, we can make nice with the CCP.
And there's still elements of that.
Oh.
There's still elements in the Commerce Department.
There's definitely, and I think there's this idea that, like, the whole end of history thing, right? Where like we can all work together for a rules-based international order. Like now that the Cold War is over, there's no bad guys anymore.
Straight road to Star Trek Federation.
Well, but
Yeah.
but there's now this sort of bigger global goal that a lot of people have, which is fighting climate change. And while that's a noble idea, the problem is that it makes people believe that because we as Americans believe we're all in this together and all nations need to work together to fight climate change, that therefore the governments of every other nation also share that view that this is important, because without stopping climate change, we're all going to be flooded or the farming is going to be disrupted, et cetera, et cetera. So this is important to a lot of Americans. It's not important to the Chinese Communist Party, which just, they may not even though they say they care about climate change, they actually may not care at all. And even if they do care, it's so far down on their agenda.
Climate change is not something that the CCP talks about in their internal propaganda to the Chinese people.
No,
Like,
but they
that's
talk
not-
about it. Xi Jinping will talk about it at Davos or in meeting with other leaders, because they understand it's a leverage point.
No, yeah. What I'm saying is they don't care. You're right.
Right. And so, Americans and a lot of people in the US government mistakenly believe that because we need to work with every country on climate change to make an impact, that therefore...
Especially the country that's responsible for most of the pollution and environmental destruction in the world.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it's most.
I don't think it's actually most.
Well, here's the most
fishing
part.
destruction, et cetera.
The Chinese
That somehow doesn't claim it.
Chinese fishing is by far
That doesn't
the worst.
count as climate change.
Environmental destruction
Yeah.
is what I said.
Well, but China has built more coal-powered power plants than the rest of the world combined in the last few years. That's true. That's not a country that policy-wise is moving in a carbon-neutral direction. So, but my point is that just because we feel that every country needs to work together, like that shouldn't blind us to the reality that that's never going to happen, no matter how much wishful thinking we have. And there are ways to deal with pollution and climate change without relying on China. But this idea that like we just have to work with China, and therefore we have to have policies that give us this way to involve China, like it's just going to end up hurting us so much, and it's actually going to be worse for the climate than trying to just take matters into our own hands with the U.S. and other Western countries.
If
Right.
Americans work together, we can finally destroy the climate ourselves.
Well, that's a beautiful sentiment. But my point is that like, if we want to be serious about fighting climate change, we can't rely on China, which is building coal-fired power plants. We should, for example, move more manufacturing back to the U.S., where we have a regulatory environment that is requiring cleaner energy. And if you have manufacturing in a country like the US or in Europe, where you have less pollution per kilowatt, then you are actually reducing carbon emissions. You are improving the environment without relying on China.
Well, I don't think the problem is just that we rely on China to do things. I think it's also that, well, look at what happened with the Paris Climate Agreement, right? Where the agreement is essentially that like developed countries like the US will restrict their carbon emissions, but countries like China will not, because they get another decade
It's
or
amazing
something.
they were able to get China to agree to that deal.
Well, I mean, I think if they didn't say that, they wouldn't have agreed to the deal, right?
Yeah.
So it's not just about like relying on China to do things, but it's making concessions.
Right.
Things that hurt American industry.
It's basically like if all three of us agreed that we're going to go on a diet and lose weight. But like my agreement with you guys is that I will also go on this diet, but mine's going to start in the year 2060.
And meanwhile, Chris and I are responsible for losing all the weight of 3 people.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, again, as Supreme Leader, this is one of my policies. I understand that the climate is a myth.
There's no climate.
There's no climate. So I won't fall for those tricks.
Very good.
Too smart.
I mean, it's not just climate change, though, to your point, Matt. Like that whole thing that you just use climate change as an example of, it's what happens with anything where we're like, we need the Chinese Communist Party to get on board.
With stopping fentanyl coming into the U.S., with stopping human trafficking. Like, yeah, maybe we can maybe work with them together on this sort of thing. It's in their interest, Shelley. It's in their interest.
I don't think the U.S. government really understands what's in China's interests, or what's in the Communist Party's interest, rather.
No, they don't. But the CHIPS Act is definitely a very strong step in the right direction, in my view.
I hate to keep saying this, but it's not the CHIPS Act.
What is it?
Well, the CHIPS Act is a good thing, but that was the thing a couple months ago.
Yeah,
this
with
was a new
Congress.
executive order. The CHIPS Act was legislation.
Yeah, that's why I was getting them mixed up, because you had said CHIPS Act, and I was like, the legislation, Congress.
I know, and then I had to be like, it's not the CHIPS Act.
It's a new executive order.
But Shelley, when you corrected me, I wasn't listening.
I wasn't correcting you. I corrected Chris, but you weren't listening to that. And then I had to do it again, which made me feel bad. But yeah.
This is what happens when I don't listen to you. Everything's fine.
No skin off your back. But yeah, the reason I think that it's easier to think of it as the CHIPS Act is because the actual name for these rules are really long and boring. So there's not like there's not a good way to say like the new Biden administration's new semiconductor chip rules against China. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and so, moving forward, we're definitely going to be keeping a close eye on the black box that is the Party Congress. And it'll be very interesting to see what will or won't change based on Xi Jinping getting a third term in power, which seems very likely at this point that's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can pretty much predict what the CCP is going to do because it's what they say they're going to do.
Well, just, because we talked about how Xi, even if he gets his third term in power, he is not like completely secure in his position. There's still lots of political infighting. There's transparent problems that lots of people have, like the zero COVID stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty clear that this is not the end of general hostility.
Thankfully, no, because I love that show. And I mean, since I'm such a fan of it, I would love to have a T-shirt about general hostilities. But wait, there is a T-shirt that you can get at ChinaUncensored.tv/merchandise. Help support our work by putting on clothes.
You're doing so well.
I think that's a good slogan.
Help support our work by putting on clothes.
Yeah, versus, you know,
Nobody else has that slogan, Shelley.
as Mark Twain said, I forget exactly what he said. It was a clever line about how, like, naked people, you should dress well because naked people rarely are listened to, or something like that. It was,
Yeah.
he was very clever. I am less clever.
Now I desperately want to look that up and see if it's real.
Well, I definitely saw on the internet a picture of Mark Twain
With that quote
with
on.
that quote.
Okay.
And if you need more proof than that, you're probably one of these climate people who thinks climate is real.
I think we should make a T-shirt with Mark Twain's picture on it that says "I love general hostility."
Wow, you said that?
Yeah,
Wow, cool.
you should buy the general hostility T-shirt.
I should buy our own merch. That's like taking a resource and diminishing it.
I mean, it's not a finite. T-shirts are not a finite resource.
They're an
Well,
they're an
The
infinite
general
resource.
hostility one is because it's only available for a limited time only.
Yeah.
So get yours today. And don't be naked because Mark Twain hates naked people. Thanks for watching China Unscripted. I'm Chris Chappell.
I'm Shelley Chong.
And I'm Matt Ganesta.
We'll see you next time.